Now!
Bet your mother had a loud bark.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Morning Coffee with the Chief and your chief, retired chief from the LA County Sheriff's Department, Pat Jordan. Your normal host is away on assignment, and I'm filling in today. I'm retired LA County Sheriff Sergeant Cliff Yates, and I'm honored to have a couple co-hosts with me today that are also good friends of mine, and I'm going to get to them right after I tell you we are reviewing a great movie today, 2018 movie Den of Thieves, starring Gerard Butler, and 50 Cent is in that movie, and it's a great crime heist movie, and so I'm looking forward to talking about that movie with my co-host, and I'll introduce first fellow LA County Sheriff Lieutenant Ron Daly. Ron, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Cliff. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. And also joining us today is a wealth of knowledge, retired detective from the NYPD, Vic Ferrari. Vic, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, guys. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
This movie is, it kind of highlights an elite unit within the LA County Sheriff's Department. I think it's loosely based on the Major Crimes Bureau that maybe we still do have on the Sheriff's Department. They kind of make reference to it. I was a little disappointed even though I thought I recognized some of the locations, I was a little disappointed to see that most of the filming took place like in Atlanta, Georgia, to take advantage of the tax breaks they give them. But the opening scene there is at a location where I guess a robbery homicide takes place there. And what'd you guys think of that opening scene where we have the sheriff's unit uniform, then I guess the FBI showing up there? Ron, go ahead. I'll go to you first, Ron.
Okay. Are you talking about the tactical stuff that went down, or just the aftermath of the interaction between the cops at the crime scene?
Let's go tactical first. I think we better start with that first. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll be honest with you. That's probably one of like, as you look for the hook to get people in, when it starts talking about the time and the date and the numbers, and it goes all the way down to, I believe, like the seconds or the minutes. There's this nefarious robberies, and violence, and it's the robbery capital of the world. That kind of gets the juices flowing for me. And then obviously, based on my training background and stuff, when they ultimately roll up, and obviously, I guess security guards are much like cops. They want to stop for donuts and all kinds of stuff in the wee hours of the morning. They roll up, and the next thing you know, the tactical squad shows up and gets all crazy and does what I guess these guys are former MARSOC guys or Marine SF guys, and they do their thing, which is kind of cool, kind of Hollywoody, but definitely gets me drawn in. And I will tell you one thing, just as a critique. Maybe it's the drill instructor coming out of me and wearing the right uniform and stuff. I don't like when our uniform as worn is misrepresented. Like the patches don't match. It doesn't give a true representation of who we are. But otherwise, that opening scene, whether they're stealing the storyline or not, or paying homage to like Heat or the North Hollywood shootout, you definitely kind of get that vibe. And Heat is another movie that the shooting scenes and everything else and kind of the relationships between the characters I'm really all about. But I would like to say, at least from my end of things, one thumbs up for the opening scene and whatnot.
How about you, Vic? Chime in here.
It definitely grabs your attention, like Ron said. I mean, it's action packed. Like you said, it's a build up. It's at night. These guys they're going to get ripped off. pull an armored car in front of a 7-Eleven, you know something's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it was well done. It is the parallel to Heat, right? In the opening scene in Heat, they hit an armored car in an abandoned area. I kind of, if I'm remembering that opening scene, the deputies went roaring up their lights and sirens almost up to the 7-Eleven, which you guys know you cut that stuff blocks or even a mile before, because you don't want the bad guys to know you're on your way. They know it, but you don't want you want to have that surprise to kind of sneak up on them or be able to evaluate tactically what you're going to do next. But yeah, oh no, it's definitely a showstopper, that opening scene.
Yeah, they say, and well, you know, other people have talked about this movie. Basically, said it's kind of like two. They would describe it also not only a crime movie but a heist movie, right? There's kind of two storylines that go along there. I didn't like the fact that obviously you guys can speak to this also. Ron, you first. How the crime scene. I mean, I don't care what rank you were. I mean, I know in the sheriff's department we kept a pretty tight lid on who was through that yellow tape and people didn't want to be on the list. They didn't want to have to get called for entering that crime scene. And you see everybody all over this crime scene, right?
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be how we normally run a crime scene. And also kind of the dynamics between the various folks that are there, FBI, etc. But you can tell, you know, Big Nick is the coolest guy on the yard. You don't even have to ask him. And I kind of like the character, man, as we start to kind of dive into that. But you know, it's even to the point where when he's in the crime scene, obviously he's probably been up. If you know, and I'll fill in the blanks here creatively, he's probably been out all night, you know, doing things, you know, that he probably shouldn't be doing. And he's kind of hungry, so he reaches in the box of donuts that one of our victims had that's now deceased and starts eating the donut right there on the scene and everything. And you're kind of like, you know, okay, you know, that's how this is going to go, you know. So it definitely just like kind of the tactical and the explosion and the beginning scenes, how it really opens it up. His character makes a how shall we say, an entrance that is almost like Hulk Hogan-esque, is like he comes into the ring and you're just like, oh, it's gonna be this guy, dude. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, our crime scenes are super tight. Like, we don't play around with that. You know, you sign in, you sign out. It's gonna be a homicide handle, and the last thing you want to do is be on the butt end of one of those. And there's some really good folks there, but I tell you that the vast majority of the old school homicide detectives I ran into, like, you know, 20 years ago, if you flubbed up their crap,
oh man, yeah,
man, dude, you got hammered. So, like, some dude from Major Crimes, even though I have a tremendous amount of respect for them, that would be a homicide handle at that particular point in time, and then everything would be done offsite at a command post, and then they would trickle people in accordingly. You know, and you have like multiple agencies. I think it's depicted like it's LAPD that's coming in there before the sheriffs, or kind of simultaneous. So you got multiple agencies and stuff like that. That is going to be the approach to that is going to be very calculated, because you got a lot of different agencies in there. And just remember, and I take this with a certain amount of pride, even though I appreciate all of our other agencies, there's only one chief law enforcement official in LA County. And when it all comes down to it, it's the sheriff that ultimately makes the decisions and decides where everything else goes as it relates to those kind of mutual aid type situations. But it made for good Hollywood, you know, but people just coming in and contaminating the crime scene and doing everything else. One thing I will say is I love, and I didn't learn the character's name, I love the relationship between the FBI agent, who is like I'll just say a vegan soy boy,
yeah,
and then Nick, Big
yeah.
Nick, as he likes to be called. I like that dynamic between those two guys. But otherwise, I thought it very Hollywoodish, but it had enough stuff there that you were kind of like, okay, that's probably how it happens.
Yeah. How about you, Vic? How about your crime scenes in New York? Are they pretty much tightened down like that?
Yeah, and exactly like you said, Cliff. As far as nobody wants to, no, because you enter that crime scene. First off, it's almost like you have to ask permission, and then
Right.
why do you
Yeah.
want to come in here? And then, like you said, you don't want to get on that list.
No.
You're gonna get. You know how a homicide goes. I mean, they always go to trial, and everybody's going to get subpoenaed. So, and you guys are right. No, we did the same thing. I mean, it was on lockdown for hours, and we would have, and if something that big, they would have brought a temporary command center there that would have been off site, that people would have been going back and forth as not to contaminate the crime scene. And like you said, the opening scene, who the badass is. He gets there. But the reality is, if he was that wired into it, his phone would have gone off hours earlier.
Yeah.
He would have been expected to get out of bed and get his ass over there like immediately if all things being true. I mean, those homicide guys, I mean, they're up all hours of the night. Their phones are going off. And even if they're on vacation, sometimes they're getting phone calls.
Oh, absolutely. But they're kind of known as, I know our homicide guys were kind of known for being big drinkers and kind of being out all times of day and night doing things. We're seeing I know, right? We're seeing kind of the opening scene here. I'm told that those stats were way off base as far as, a bank robbery every 44 minutes, although I think it was like every hour or so, at least we have had one. And Vic, kind of weird. And I know the area a little bit, but we have all these kind of like satellite cities around LA that have their own police departments. So with anybody watching, so you would have Gardenia, where I guess that was the first location right there. They would have their own police department though, but in a homicide, they would call in our homicide. So that would be kind of a multi-jurisdictional thing. But Ron, I'll have you chime in on this. I don't know, why would LAPD be there unless they were tracking these guys or something, right?
Yeah, that's why I said I was kind of confused, but it looked like LAPD cars, I guess, for lack of a better word. That's why I threw that in there. If they're calling Los Angeles at that time the murder capital of the world and robbery capital of the world and everything else, that's why they would have been there. And I mean, just to be honest, let's be candid. In Hollywood, probably LAPD and NYPD have more push and recognition than, say, the sheriff's department, as it relates to movies and sitcoms and things like that. So maybe they just wanted to sprinkle some of that in there so that they could, gain everybody's interest and whatnot. But I would say in some of the areas that I worked, at least as a uniform patrol deal, we had really good working relationships. So like, especially up like in our Firestone district of Century Station, we butted up against like Southeast and 77th from LAPD. And we always had a really good relationship with them, as long as it wasn't traffic collision, because then CHP and them would argue that it was like 3 inches off of the curb line and it wasn't theirs. Yeah. But other than that, we had a great relationship with those guys. And so maybe if this is in the LA area or whatever, that they would be coming together. And I actually, even just because I'm a nerd, was listening to some of the radio traffic throughout the deal, and they're naming some of the streets, but I can't find where they intersect or cross. But they're calling out names like Slauson and areas like that, which is kind of our part of our north end there for Firestone. But like I said, they do enough to where, at least for me, you can maintain my attention. As I don't want to say I'm an expert witness or anything, but you can hold my attention as a cop long enough, but then they start to sprinkle in this other stuff where I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? But otherwise why the LAPD would be in there, maybe that would be a reason.
Yeah, I know they talked about in the Pico Rivera mentioned with Atlantic and Wilcox, and they kind of run parallel, that there wouldn't be a crossing there. Hey, Vic, what you guys, so you get, New York City, you get the 5 boroughs. I mean, you really wouldn't have any other agencies that would be showing up at your crime scenes, right? It would just be NYPD, or maybe you would get the feds once in a while, or how would that work?
The feds wouldn't be there for hours later, but like you guys said, so New York City borders up against several Westchester County police departments like Yonkers or New Rochelle. And if something's big enough, or a chase goes on the border, if something's coming from there, coming into the city from Yonkers, we get a call. Everybody runs up to that border, and sometimes we'll go over the border. And I don't really know about Queens, but they border up with Nassau County, so I'm sure there's been some joint efforts. But you're right, it's when no one really has to do the heavy lifting, everybody shows up. And like you said, if there's an accident 3 inches over, there's a debate over who's got this.
Yeah. I just saw one of they're showing the main crook there, who was played by Pablo Schreiber, right? He plays Ray Merriman. He says, well, if it's major crimes, we're in trouble. And do we still have a major crimes bureau, Ron? Do you know?
Yeah, so Majors is still really big as a bureau in detective division. They're very active on a variety of things. One thing that, I don't want to monopolize anybody's time or anything because I love
We
hearing
got
like
plenty of
Vic's.
time. Yeah.
I love Vic's thing, but funny story. When this movie came out, well, let me back up. I had never heard of this aspect of Major Crimes Bureau, which at this time when they bring this out is what's known as a BRTF, or the Burglary Robbery Task Force. Now, the very first time I ever heard of the Burglary Robbery Task Force was when I was a watch commander at Temple, and Temple has a predominantly like Asian community, and they had a very violent home invasion, takeover robbery that I believe the husband was LAPD, either active or retired, and he was severely injured. And at that time, my one of my former TOs, and he said I could mention his name for the show, is a dude named Mike Maher, who just retired as a sergeant. He was the sergeant that showed up at Temple Station after this thing happened. And dude, looking like a dirt bag, looking
Yeah.
very, very big Nick and undercover. And he was the team sergeant. And he was I only had two TOs at patrol. And him and I were together for quite some time. And I was like, hey, what are you doing? How's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Because now I'm outrank him and everything else. And we're shucking and jiving. And he's like, hey, man, I'm on this burglary robbery task force. So my joke to him moving forward was he's Big Nick
Yeah. Oh,
from the
gotcha.
show,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's all based off of this crew.
Yeah.
Now, so I called him, and one thing I want to thank you guys, because as I kind of push out into this workspace of podcasts, which I was never like gonna do,
Yeah.
um, is it's caused me not only to learn a bunch of new things and review, but I'm rekindling relationships that have been long like dull.
Yeah. Me
And
too.
so
Yeah.
Mike and I talked on the phone for 2+ hours as he drove home from a family Thanksgiving deal. And that's all based off of the crew that he ran at Burglary Robbery Task Force that's a part of Major Crimes. So Major Crimes has like SAT teams, or surveillance and apprehension teams. They do cargo
Yeah.
cats that deal with like thefts, say like down at the port and stuff that are high dollar. And basically what the Burglary Robbery Task Force was put together to do was to target and locate and arrest and make sure that those cases were very, very solid. Violent robberies, high dollar burglaries, and like crimes that relate to those in series. And then that's what they'd be put on. And this task force was put together, like, for example, there was no resource that was off the table. They had their own dedicated fixed wing. They had their own dedicated helicopter. They had whatever sort of technological, and I don't want to get into all the who's, what's, when, and where's, but whatever they could do to find, fix, and ultimately kind of wrap up or finish the case with the bad guy, they had at their disposal. And I will tell you, back to that part in Temple when I was a watch commander and he showed up, I knew things were different, dude. Like, I'm like, God dang, man, they got a lot of freaking stuff here, man. They have a lot of folks. So we just opened rooms to them and gave them like conference rooms and stuff like that. And quite literally, those dudes, and how I patterned one of the teams that I was on afterwards, those dudes literally, once they're going to target somebody, know anything and everything about that person before they ever go up on them or start surveilling them.
Yeah.
And when I did talk to Mike and I asked him questions, he confirmed he wasn't a technical advisor for this movie, but he said that their team was patterned off of LAPD's Special Investigative Section, or SIS,
SIS. Yep.
and but without the shootings. So their job was to watch all that stuff, but not get out there and get all crazy in the streets and end up dumping bad guy, because that brings a lot of heat. And I will tell you, uh, as we dive into these characters, that he said that one of the main reasons they're continuing able to do what they do is because when big things happened and the big, huge cases that they ultimately did, was because they always brought good news back to the department.
Gotcha.
And it wasn't like, hey, we got these 3 dead guys that we watched go in and,
Yeah.
pulled up or smash and grab at this one place. So not to get long-winded, but this was at that time period based off of that team.
Yeah. Yeah, Ron, I'm glad you brought up the the teams that ended up down by the port and whatnot, because I want Vic to chime in here, because Vic, you ran or were part of a crew, a stolen car crew that ended up following cases out to LA into San Pedro and to the docks there, correct?
Yeah, Long Beach, California. Yeah, we had a case where we had Asian nationals that were shipping 25 to 30 Audis a month. They were stealing them, putting them in shipping containers, railing them across the United States, and then they were getting loaded at Long Beach and then shipped out to Shanghai.
Wow. Did you have any did you correspond with any of our special units like the Major Crimes Bureau when you were doing that, or was it
No,
LAPD?
afterwards, a couple of people had reached out to them, because what happened was the case kind of got blown up in the middle.
Oh,
The
okay.
warehouse got compromised. The precinct cops stumbled upon it and ran in there, and then basically we had to
Really?
round everybody up in 15 minutes.
Oh, that's crazy. And so did you run your crew, or were you a supervisor, or what was
No, I
your?
wasn't a supervisor, but I was a detective working on it.
Yeah.
My job was to ID a lot of these guys, because there was like 30 people involved in this case. So we were getting up first thing in the morning, surveilling them, and a lot of the Asians, they had phony IDs. The cars were registered to fictitious people. So we were just, that's the name you're going to use. That's who you're going to be until we figure out who you are.
Gotcha. Okay. And how many did you guys kind of dress like this, or kind of do your own thing? Were you kind of off?
Yeah, just jeans and sneakers. It just depended on the neighborhood. At one point, we had the NYPD's got 40,000 members. So what we wound up doing was grabbing Chinese cops that worked in the department that weren't detectives but spoke different dialects, and we pulled them out of different assignments on temporary assignments with us to do surveillance in some of the neighborhoods and then monitor the wiretaps, because some of our bad guys were speaking in Mandarin and Cantonese.
Wow. Yeah, in the opening scene, I'll bring this up to you first, Ron. The guy mentions, "Hey, listen, next week we got a piss test." So we were at a point. I'll ask you afterwards, Vic, if you guys had to do this, but we would be subject to random urine test. And I got called in like 4 times to do a random urine test, and some people had never got called in. But Ron, did you ever have experience to have to do that?
Tons of funny stories.
Yeah.
But I will say that I had the privilege of, how shall I say this? And I've built bridges, I've gotten over this stuff, and as we unpack this, maybe not so much. But funny story, one of the very last times I was piss tested as a lieutenant, a person that was my sergeant at a particular unit that kind of went out of his way to kind of be and I'll just, so Vic doesn't blush, I'll just use phonetics and say he was a bit of an Adam Henry and micromanager.
Yeah.
He showed up as I was a lieutenant, and he was the sergeant on the piss test team,
Oh boy.
and had to look at me and be like, "Okay, Lieutenant Daly," and I'm like, so funny urine stories. I was, and not to say because I like the guy, me, when I was a watch commander at Temple, me and the captain at that time got banged. They just showed up. I was leaving off of my early morning shift, tired, and my captain was coming in, and they hemmed me and him up in the briefing room. And you have to list all of the things that you're taking. And me, I'm like, I take multivitamins, I take freaking,
Yeah.
supplements. They even want to know energy drinks. They want to know all this stuff. Well, between, and I jokingly say this, Ron Daly at that time on my department ran on caffeine and hate. That was kind of that's kind of how I managed my career.
I
Well,
love it. Yeah.
what's funny is I go in and I fill out all this stuff, and I don't know what he put on there. He's filling out his next to me, and he's putting like ginseng or something. And then he's sitting there, and I'm listing like, "Hey, do you have like a continuation page for this?" And I finish all my
That's
stuff
funny.
up. I finish up all my stuff. I go and piss and come back, and you got to do an A and a B sample, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know
right.
if
Yep.
everybody does that, but you got to
Yeah.
do an A and a B sample. You have to seal it. You come in, you put the sticker on it for everything that you filled out ahead of
Yeah.
time. And then they put it in this little lunchbox looking thing, dude. Okay, well, I finish all my stuff up where he had already done his one line on his supplements, and I had done like my probably 15. And then I had gone and peed, come back, start packaging all my stuff up, and he was still sitting at the desk the same way he was before. And so what was hilarious to me was what I thought in my mind is that this guy has like a performance anxiety, if you want to call it that, where he can't even tinkle when these guys are here to freaking get his piss. And
Yeah.
I left, and mind you, this is like a half-hour thing, and the dude's sitting in the same thing. So I hit him up. I'm like, "Hey, boss, blah 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 blah," and he's like, "Yeah, I can't use the restroom." So now if you imagine the like the plastic cups of water, because they won't let you leave, so it's not like he can go
Right.
to his
No.
office and do whatever. So now they're like stacking up these plastic cups of water, like telling him, "Hey, sir, you gotta, drink this and do your thing." So that was one of my funny ones where I left there and I was like, man, I wonder if he's going to get popped, man. Like if he's just, doing his thing. But he was my boss up until he unceremoniously retired. But that was kind of a funny one that sticks out in my mind.
Yeah, if I remember right, you had 4 hours to do it, and they would keep you locked down there until you went. Vic, did you guys have a urine
Ours
team?
Ours is totally different. So the department, through collective bargaining, in the
Ah.
old days, the only way they could drug test you, it's called a dole test, is if a supervisor filled out the paperwork and it went through the proper channels, and then they would pull you out. And then probably about 1988, 1989, they went to the random drug testing. And so it works like this. Like they usually dole test probably about 25 people a day. So what'll happen is the NYPD, every unit's got a teletype. So first thing in the morning, a teletype will come up to all the commands in the 5 boroughs that these 25 people are scheduled for random drug testing. It doesn't matter if you're off, you're off. That's it. But if you're working, by the end of the day, you have to go out to Left Rack City in Queens, which is our health service division. I think it's on the 8th floor, and you have to pee in a cup. If you don't show up, you're out of a job. It's no suspension. They fire you. That's it.
Wow.
And I mean, I was one time in White Plains, which is another jurisdiction in Westchester County on a joint case wiretap. And I'm signing out on overtime about 8:00 at night. And one of the guys that was manning the phones in our main office goes, "Did you get dole today?" I says, "What are you talking about?" Because I came in for a 10 to 6 and now I'm leaving at 8:00 at night. He says, "Vic," he goes, "I'm looking right here." I said, someone dropped the ball. So I had to drive out to Queens. I mean, I didn't get done till about midnight, but they don't care. If you don't piss in that, and like you said, the A and the B sample, if you don't piss in that cup, you're out of a job.
Wow.
And they test. And then I'll tell you a funny story. So when I first got hired, there was 100 of us, 100 young men and women. We show up, they're doing our exams, hernia, x-rays and everything. Then they separate the boys from the girls. And they give you 2 cups, and they march in 10 of us at a time into this bathroom. And the bathroom is specially set up. There's 10 urinals, right? You step up to the plate, and above your head are mirrors tilted at a 45-degree angle, right? So, and 10 supervisors walk in. It's like a mob hit. 10 supervisors walk in behind you, and they're standing over your shoulder watching you, like in the NFL, like someone's going to try to block a kick. And if the guy is short and he can't look over your shoulder, he's looking at the mirror. And I'm 21 years old. I'm gun shy to begin with. I don't like pissing in front of people.
Yeah, me
and I'm
neither.
pushing and pushing and pushing, and people are walking in and out with their cups of gold. And I'm just standing there with these 2 cups. And finally, I let go with a fart, and the guy's crotch standing in back of me, and he went ballistic. He goes, "Get the fuck out." He threw me out of the room. I had to sit in another room and drink coffee for 45 minutes until finally I could go.
Yeah, so I don't know, man, I would have had, I got a bashful bladder like you, right?
Oh,
So
I hate it.
But luckily, I mean, they were pretty sophisticated with the department. They would come in and color the water blue or whatever, and they would block off the sink.
They've caught so many people on my job going in with prosthetic penises, or they caught another guy with a French's mustard bottle taped under his armpit with good urine, and then he snaked a tube down his pants. There was another guy who supposedly could never prove it, but he had his brother shoot him. So he would go to the hospital as opposed to he was on his way to the test and he got shot. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy. With a 40,000 member department, I mean, there's always crazy stories.
Wow.
So I could tell you one other thing, Cliff, just because I want to one-up our East Coast NYPD folks for our West Coast, is when he talked about farting. One time when I did do that, I mean, we didn't have any mirrors or whatever, and I would just hope that the lighting was really good and the angle was just right, but to kind of help us guys out. But is like, I don't know, when you go up at the urinal, man, you just kind of like, you release kind of everything,
Yeah.
it's kind
Right.
of, the front door, the back door, the side door, whatever, just kind of opens up. Well, I got a fart, right? So now I got the dude behind me. He ain't all up on me NYPD style, but he's close enough to where I'm like, I'm not really liking this. So I go ahead and let loose, and it's pretty squeaky or whatever. And just to lighten the thing, I go, hey, man, and you can edit this out, Cliff, if you want. I go, but I'm like, hey, bro. And he's a big yoked out sergeant that actually supervised me at Sentry for a minute as well. So he probably thought I was like this, gunslinging freaking rogue deputy that was just kind of out doing whatever I wanted. Never had any run-ins with him, but I turned around and looked over my shoulder and I was like, hey, man, how tight did that sound, man? Because it was like all loud and squeaky. And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders, man. And that was it. So that was the other funny. I mean, I got tons of those things, but I don't know how G-rated you want the show to be. And I don't want, the chief to not invite you back, Cliff.
I think we're all good with that one. So you can you imagine, guys, I've been retired for over 10 years, and do you know that I got called in for a urine test just 2 weeks ago? Can you believe that?
This is going to be a joke. I know it, Cliff. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Dude, this is a Cliff. This is the stand-up Cliff.
I got my six-pack captain's license. And so twice now, I've had it for 2 years, man. They've called me in once a year. They just like on the department, they call you in to urine test you for your captain's license for your vessels. So they're pretty strict on that. Wow, crazy. But no one ever came in the bathroom with me. That was weird that you guys both had that experience.
No, they don't trust anybody.
Yeah, no, I don't think our department did either. But I guess I don't know. They kept it to a little. When they first started this, I don't know if you guys had any trouble with that, Vic. I'll first go to Ron, but there was a guy. When they first started this, we're talking 19. I think in the department it was about 1990, 91, and there was a guy. He tested positive for opiates, and they ended up like following him out to his house. They didn't have it dialed in yet, and he had these muffins with certain kind of raisins or whatever, and that would trigger an opiate response. Do you remember that, Ron?
Yeah, so there actually a lieutenant I worked with, his go-to was coffee bean because we don't do Starbucks.
Yeah.
And when I was at a technology unit, he was a former Compton PD dude that came on, and he's out your way too. He's like balling like you. He's got like islands out in Florida or whatever. And he built a house up on stilts, but that was like his last assignment. And him and I hit it off, and he would do poppy seed muffins.
That's what it was. Poppy seeds. They'll trigger opiate. Yeah.
And he was like, dude, and he was a former IA guy, and he told me some great stories about certain things. But him, me, and the civilian director from that technology unit, which would be the civilian rank of what would be equivalent of our captain, but just because it was a technology unit, they would hire what we call professional staff or civilians to be kind of the subject matter folks on those things. And he had an incident like that, but I have no doubt the dude was telling the truth, but hey, it was the muffin.
Yeah. I know later on they didn't have any trouble with that. Did you guys have any false positive type things, Vic?
Yeah, but they knew about that. So if you tested positive, like you said, poppy seeds, there was another test for that. Also quinine and gin and tonics.
That's really?
Thing that'll flag.
Oh, then I would have been locked up right away. I've cut down on the gin and tonics, but I love them. What was I going to say? You know what? They talked about the one guy, Donnie, right? The guy they took from the bar there and kind of kidnapped him and were questioning him. But they were, putting leverage on that he was a two-striker. So I know when I was still on the sheriff's department before I retired in 2013, I mean, man, the 3 strikes, that really worked well, man. There was a lot of people that went away for a long time, and there was a lot. So, Ron, when did they do away with that out in LA?
I still think 3 strikes is on the table.
Okay, it is. All right.
It's just for qualified like violent felonies. But I can tell you when drugs were still a crime, I can remember I was at patrol off training. and we struck a dude out on probably about 15-20 bucks a rock cocaine, on a bike stop. And his attorney, this was the very first time, actually, a really kind of cool cat, kind of eccentric dude, where I know he would have had to wait for me, hemmed me up in the elevator. And since we made the arrest in Firestone's our dear reporting district, it was referred to Norwalk. And all the crooks knew one of the reasons why you like that is they knew Norwalk court. The criminals called it No Walk court, because once it went to trial, bro, you were bought
You're
and paid
locked
for.
up.
There
Yeah.
was none of this deal making or anything. So man, the guy's name escapes me right now. But I'll probably remember it in a shiny balloon moment, so I'll provide it then. But he hems me up in the elevator, and he's like, "Hey, dude, look, blah blah blah." And dude, I made a point never to talk to attorneys, dude.
Right.
Okay, I
Yeah.
barely wanted to talk to the freaking district attorney.
That's a
was
good
Deputy
policy.
Dickerson.
Yeah.
No upside.
So
There's no
me and-
upside to that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, Vic.
Well, what's funny story is me and him chatted up in the elevator, and I just tell him, "Hey, dude, I'm going to go ahead and testify to this, that, and the next thing, and the report speaks for itself," kind of thing. And that we ended up striking that dude out, and then later on, retroactively, because it was a nonviolent drug-related offense, sometime later they gave the dude like 8 years or something, because I followed the case. So when they I don't know what you call it, where they basically kind of revise the law, which like nothing, they even have like misdemeanor assault with a deadly weapon or aggravated assault now. I mean, what the hell that is, I have no idea. But when they kind of renumerated the stuff and redid some things, they changed some of those aspects of it.
Yeah.
But 3 strikes is still on the table. But with the DA out there in LA County and everything, if you're not filing federal charges to get around him, odds are you're not.
Yeah.
You're not getting it. So, but yeah, I think 3 strikes is still on the table, to be a little
Okay.
long-winded about it.
Hey, Vic, so 3 strikes. I don't know if you had, it was basically your third conviction of a qualified crime would get you 25 years to life. So did you guys have anything like that?
No, they passed what's called the Rockefeller laws. I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s, like Ron said, when drugs was a thing. And that was to target traffickers. And if you got caught with certain amounts of drug, it was called A1, A2 felony. You were going away for a long time.
Yeah. Class A felonies. Yeah.
And I worked in the narcotics division for a while. And I mean, if you caught somebody, especially like heroin, because with heroin, you could step on it more. It's more potent, like a kilo of Coke back in the day was 17 to 25,000. I think a kilo of heroin back then was 180,000, because you could just step on it so many more times and make more money with it. And I mean, if you got caught with like an ounce of heroin, you were going. I mean,
oh yeah. Speaking of there was a guy in our department, I won't mention his name, but he was this guy was crazy. I don't know how he ended up lasting for so many years on the department, but he ended up being a mayor of one of our cities, and he ended up going to prison for some kind of embezzlement. And you probably know the city, Ron. It was down there in Linwood. But this guy he'd be in the hallway, and he'd be talking to these attorneys, and he'd just be telling them, I planted the dope on this guy, and I didn't read him his rights, and and then I charged him with this and that, but it wasn't true. And and these attorneys are just going crazy, right? And he'd be up on the stand and they'd be going off, "Isn't it true? Deputy so-and-so, you just told me you planted dope on my client, and you said you did this, and you lied on your police report." And he said, "Yeah, but that was in the hallway. I'm under oath now. I have to tell the truth. I was lying out there." He was just doing crazy stuff like that.
Is that the guy that got sucked into the Tupac Shakur homicide? I was watching some documentary, and I was watching that there was, and because he was the mayor of some municipality out there. I'm thinking it's the same guy.
No, that's a different guy, I'm pretty sure. But matter of fact, I don't know if there was a couple of guys, LAPD guys were involved in. They were guarding these guys. Who were they, Ron? They got one of the undercover guys ended up getting chased down there in North Hollywood. There was a big shootout between these undercover guys and then off-duty LAPD guys working as security. So they're shooting at each other, and it kind of predated just shortly before the Biggie Smaller Tupac murder. Yeah. I don't know if you know those cases, Ron, at all.
Well, there's a lot. I'll just chalk it up as kind of buffoonery, but I mean,
Yeah.
when you're working these kind of units, like in the spirit of the movie, um, one of the biggest challenges is going from like this plain closed or what we call UC undercover capacity, where you're dropping out of the car in flip flops and shorts, possibly, as you're kind of ebbing and flowing in and out of the environment in order to kind of get a lay of the land and not just staying in your car, where all of a sudden now bad guy and it's go time and dudes are bailing out of cars and stuff. One of the biggest challenges is identifying yourself so you don't have kind of that blue on blue type thing. But our burglary robbery task force folks, which again is what kind of this loosely this crew in Den of Thieves is based off of. They're required at a moment's notice when you come flying out. You either have a badge on a chain, a flak vest, whatever else, and you're immediately able to do it before you take police action. And that's just part of. You usually find your most qualified, mature decision makers at the deputy and supervisor levels are the ones they put on these types of details, because you don't want them being kind of that pit bull. Like, I would say I would be more of like a pit bull on a chain that is only given 3 links by a supervisor. That would be more me.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's times where that's a good thing that you need people like that, but then these types of people are the ones that maybe take that extra step, make really good decisions during critical times and stuff like that, as opposed to going off half cocked, where I'm attempting to make decisions that I think are based off the information in front of me, but people aren't properly identifying themselves. We have and still have, and maybe Vic can comment on this. I would assume they have some sort of process like this in place. Is we have what we call LA Clear, our clearinghouse. And what you would do is, if you were going to conduct an operation and or hit a house or something like that, you would call LA Clear, give them the area and or what your operation was, and they would put it up on what we call the board. And it was a centralized area that I believe it was administrated by HIDTA, the High Intensity Drug Task Force Interdiction guys. I
Yeah.
could be wrong on that, but they would monitor this board. And so when Vic would call up and be like, "Hey, man, you know what? I got information on this thing. I got a judge to sign a warrant. I want to hit this pad, blah, 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 blah." And I give all the information. They would let me know if the location was clear or not. So now when you have all these undercover operations going on that obviously are going to overlap,
Right. You
there's
wouldn't
going to
have
be
that. Yeah.
there's going to be phone calls made, so that it's going to be like, "Hey," and I'll just call them dirt bags, because our guys on my squad, and I got to imagine it's very similar on Vic's, these dudes look like heathens, man. Like, you
Oh
would run
yeah.
into them and you'd just be like, "Dude, that is not a cop." Me, I
Yeah.
reek of cop. Like, I show up, they're like, "Dude, that's the
Yeah.
police right there."
Me too.
These dudes, you would be like, "Dude, there is no way this guy's a cop." So that ultimately what would happen is you would either meet off site, have a brief little discussion between the team supervisors, so they kind of had an idea of what vehicles you were driving, and you would do that because LA Clear would put you in touch in an attempt to avoid that. But even then, there's stuff's going to happen, man. You got bad guys out there that have a vote in tactical situations. You got aggressive cops that are, how shall I say it, getting on the trigger because that's what we want to do. And, and in an attempt to stop bad guys. And unfortunately, that stuff's just going to happen. And I could talk about a myriad of cases where, uniform, non-uniformed, etc., where unfortunately, we've shot and killed our own, and or we'll just call it UD or AD, unintentionally or
Yeah.
accidentally discharged. And you can call that what you want, but usually that means that somebody probably got a little startled and popped off one round and was like, "Oh crap, I probably shouldn't have shot that person," kind of thing. But that stuff
Yeah.
kind of happens.
Hey Vic, so NYPD, they had like a color of the day or something? How did they work that? They had
Yeah,
something.
in addition to wearing like a lanyard around your neck with your shield, they would have what's called color of the day, and same principle as like I was explaining about the drug test on that teletype. It's called the finest message. Every morning there'd be a color of the day: red,
Gotcha.
green. I forget the colors. Yellow. There was a whole bunch. And if you were in a plainclothes unit, you had these things. You keep them in your pocket or keep it in the radio car. And it was usually a wristband, like a foam wristband, that if you would jump out of the car and like something with it was going to be a lot of activity that, especially if you're in a citywide unit, and you're in another precinct and or another borough, and the guys don't know who you are. And additionally, to speak to what Ron was talking about, if we were going to do a search warrant for a location, it's called a DEX. I don't know what the acronym stands for, but
Oh yeah.
so if we're going to hit a place, you would enter the address that you're looking to hit, and it would go through like this clearinghouse, and supposedly all the federal agencies played along with it, but they didn't always. And you were getting like, like say for argument's sake, I'm thinking of getting a warrant on this place, and then all of a sudden it would pop up that Ron had DEXed this place 2 years ago. So I'd reach out to Ron, and he would say, yeah, he goes, yeah, go ahead. We did our case there already. I'm surprised, or sometimes someone would say, yeah, I still have an active investigation there. And then you would try to work it out. And the reason they do that is they don't want two agencies or just hitting the same place at the same time as somebody getting hurt.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. LA Clear. I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you did. Because I know somebody that's just retired from there. So that was, and I think that came out of, multiple agencies doing warrants on the same pad and it just being a cluster.
If I could comment on one thing,
please,
Cliff,
yeah.
just as it relates, and in addition to that blue on blue, so like when I became a sergeant after working custody where you and I met, and then patrol at Lenox,
yeah,
I went to when they started decriminalizing and readjusting some things when AB or Assembly Bill 109 came out, where it basically functionally took state convicted prisoners and remanded them to the custody of the sheriff. And then instead of them doing their state time, they not only reduced their sentence, but also put them in county jail instead of state prison where they should be. So I was one of the original 5 sergeants that was on that team. So we were under Cops Bureau at the time, the community policing deal, and Cops Bureau didn't have a great reputation of being, how shall we say, tactically sound and whatnot. So what we did is I took my team out with my training background. We got fully entry certified. We did all this stuff. And before this population came out, as it started to trickle, we would do what we call address verifications and do a variety of things like that, where we would go out and see, okay, this guy's going to be released out here. We're going to check on the address, blah, 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 blah. Well, we didn't have any other work to do. I had a real good crew that was hand selected, man, and everybody, I trusted everybody. And all that extra time that we had, I would just try to get work. I would call anybody and everybody I could. Hey, man, hey, we're an entry qualified team. Hey, do you need something hit? Reached out to homicide, reached out to majors. And what I was getting on this is that with the prison gang unit at majors, which is another thing that deals specifically with the prison gangs in California, which, you could say Mexican mafia is big. You can say, the Aryan Brotherhood. You could say, Nuestra Familia. You could say Black Guerrilla Family, all these things. And then all the street gangs that underline that, we would do with prison gang units. We did a lot of work, and we picked up a pretty healthy lawsuit because there was one place in what they called Phillips Ranch, which was technically Pomona, which I had the San Gabriel Valley team, and Pomona was very under-policed.
Yes.
So pretty much any time you went in there, if you could attach probation parole, or what they called PRCS, post-release community supervision, and some people would modify that and just call it pricks and say, hey, we're going to go deal with this prick over here. That's what would get said.
That's funny.
Yeah, is that if you could attach parole probation to it, then my team was on board. And so prison gangs had brought this person who was part of this gang out in Pomona, or what they call Phillips Ranch, because obviously it's a little bit more bougie than just Pomona. And we would go into Pomona, and I would say we probably pulled street level guns probably more than any other team in that bureau at that time, just going into Pomona. And we picked up a pretty healthy lawsuit with Major Crimes Prison Gang Unit because there was this one individual and small group of individuals that, how should we say, kind of needed the attention, okay, and were under watchful eye. And I think we probably hit one pad, I can remember 3 times, to the point where a U-Haul van showed up and moved all their furniture out of the place they were living. How that crud happens, I really have no idea. But also, we hit a variety of other pads off association and FI and association warrant stuff, where the same people that moved out of the other place because they were supposedly getting harassed by the cops were there as well. So now you
Yeah.
couple that all together with the prison gang units. Now you have this new team that's out there just freaking, raiding people's houses legally. And probably, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6 or 7 pretty significant contacts where everybody's getting pulled out of the house, at rifle point and everything else. And, that's kind of, how those things kind of came about as it relates to doing work with teams that come out and do that stuff. And you can imagine in LA Clear during the lawsuit that it came out that it was this place, this place, this place, this place, this
Oh,
place, this
yeah.
place, this place, and we were just hammering that whole complex. But that was one of the other stories I have as it relates to kind of using LA Clear and probably how it kind of got used against us. So just kind of be smart about, what you're doing there, for lack of a better word.
Absolutely. Hey, Vic, what'd you think of Gerard Butler? I heard he had to gain like 25, 30 pounds. Somebody said happily, if you notice it looks like it's not even makeup that he looks like he really was probably staying up all night eating and partying. He just looks so legitimate in that character.
Yeah, no, he definitely wasn't like a pretty boy Hollywood guy. And I was watching the scenes go by, and what caught me is there's that one scene where they're at the range.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm saying to myself, all right.
I was going to talk about that. He wouldn't be in a public range.
Yeah. Like so you got 50 Cent and the other guy, what's his name? Ray. And
yeah.
They're both convicted felons, right? And they're out there at a shooting range. So, first of all, he's not supposed to be in possession of a bullet, let alone a handgun. And the guns are either stolen or on a straw purchase. So he could have brought in the ATF. Like it could have ended the movie, obviously, but I mean, he could have, if he really wanted to put these guys away before they hurt someone else, he had ample opportunity right there.
Yeah. I'm sure the technical advisor tells him that's a bunch of BS, but I guess they just do it anyways. Well, we want to show this interaction between, it's another kind of a ripoff scene like from Heat where Robert De Niro and Al Pacino come together and talk. I don't know. I think it's kind of a ripoff on that type of thing where they come together and kind of give each other looks. And I think that's what they were going after. But what do you think, Ron, of Butler's? He's a great actor. He was in 300 and a couple other great movies.
Yeah. So I would say authentic, I mean, one of the things I'll always give these guys, even though there's exceptions to the rule, is the vast majority of the dudes on those teams, don't really take good care of themselves working out and eating. Yeah. They drink a lot, and I'm just making a general characterization. But if I could make a comment, like you had mentioned, technical advisor for a second, the actual technical advisor on the movie was that dude, Jay Dobbins. Who was known as Jay Bird from, and I've read a lot of his stuff and watched his stuff, but he was a former ATF guy that supposedly got patched in by the Hells Angels during a certain investigation. And he has some good books and good podcasts out there. He's actually in the movie in one of the initial bar scenes where the character Donnie Wilson, being O'Shea Jackson Jr., who I'm sure we probably know this by now, who he looks like and who he's the son of, that's Ice Cube's son.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, okay.
Yeah, so if you put Ice Cube and him right next to each other, they're spitting images of each other. So O'Shea Jackson Sr. is Ice Cube. And then Donnie Wilson is O'Shea Jackson Jr. So that's Ice Cube's kid. So in that scene where they're talking initially, where it shows him in the bar, the bald white dude that he's talking to that he's serving is actually Jay Dobbins.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Dude. Yeah. So, and I recognized him right out the gate from various documentaries and podcasts and everything else like that. So he was the main technical advisor. And when I talked to Mike Maher, who was the actual guy on the team at that time, he was like, yeah, he was around us enough to where he would know a lot of these things. But yeah, no, he because I thought Mike Maher had technically advised the whole thing, and he's like, to answer your question, no, I didn't. He goes, but those guys were there, and a lot of those guys from the agencies are what we call TFOs, or temporary task force officers. And what that allows them to do is not only have the resources of the feds, but it allows them to file in federal court with much harsher sentences
Sentences, yeah.
and everything else. But Big Nick. So another funny story, just a shiny balloon because it popped in my head, is a lot of people tell me I kind of street talk and shuck and jive, and I'll run into people and they'll be like, dude, where were you raised, or what did you do, or everything. And even when I supervise folks, they kind of said I was kind of streetish, or said things that were like, that you would normally hear like black people say or Hispanic people say and everything else. Well, when I would run into Mike Maher, I initially started saying Big Pimpin'. Like I'd be
Yeah.
like, hey, Big Pimpin', what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And he thought I was saying Big Pumpkin.
Oh, okay.
So I'm like, okay, close enough, man. I'm kind of, fast on my tongue and everything. So then he started calling me Little Pumpkin. Okay, so now he calls me Little Pumpkin, and all of a sudden I was calling him Big Pimpin', and this is Big Nick. And so when I was talking to him, I'm like, hey, man, that's Big Pimpin' right there. Or that's Big Pumpkin. And he goes, yeah, that's Big Nick. Big Nick's based off of my character and Jay Dobbins' how shall I say it, exposure to me, and how that name came out, because Big Pumpkin stuck. And that guy was always around. And then obviously I hit him up about kind of the what do we want to call it? The gang tattoo, where he's like, I'm a regulator. This means we're a gang, but we have badges kind of thing. I'm like, well, how does the dude come up with that? And then, we kind of dove down that rabbit hole or whatever. But I think that the technical advisor did a good job. He knew enough to where you'd keep people's interests, but it wasn't quite exactly right. But I love Big Nick's character. And a lot of people will say, man, he was juvenile, immature. He shows up at the house, starts drinking people's wine and signing divorce papers and being all freaking abrasive and whatnot. I laugh at that. I can see parts of that in me and a variety of other good dudes that I worked with. I would also strenuously say that management frowns upon that kind of behavior, but at bits and pieces, at least, I see that pretty much in pretty much everybody I've worked with.
Did you? So I didn't pick this up in the movie, but somebody I was watching another actually review of it. So Vic, we had a group of deputies that were actually there was articles on them being called the regulators, and I guess they had tattoos and whatnot. So they were really accurate on that. I wonder where they got that from. Maybe local thing. And did you have anything like that in NYPD, Vic, where you had groups of deputies who kind of closely associated themselves with the names or sporting
guys that would do stuff like that often got themselves into trouble. They bring attention to themselves for the wrong reasons, and then defense attorneys would pick up on it and just tear them apart. So yeah, we had guys that would, they'd be like a clique in a precinct or something. And then, they would often get themselves in trouble, and then they would, maybe one or two would get fired, or they would get jammed up and they would send them to different precincts. And did it happen every now and then? Yeah. But early in my career, there was a couple of guys that kind of went rogue and in different precincts. And some of them, like I said, some of them got arrested, or, their careers went down the toilet.
What'd you think? I'll start with you, Vic. What'd you think of 50 Cent? He's a pretty good actor, right? He does a good job in this movie.
Yeah, not bad. He's done a good job, making the jump from music into acting.
Yeah. Ron, what do you think? Do you have any contact with him? Or?
Yeah, his and we all call each other by our last names for the most part, at least until I got later on. But Lavoy, I believe, was his name. Like he said, man, Vic says he transitions into that stuff. And I think that comes from kind of, whether it's legitimate or not, his street background. He's been shot a number of times and was a drug dealer, but pretty savvy, talented dude. If you're going to talk about, like, Curtis Jackson is his name, being 50 Cent. I don't like calling these dudes by their street names, because otherwise I'm going to have you start calling me Maverick or something, dude. It's just weird to me. But Reader's Digest version is a very talented dude. Even in like the private world, he was the founder and developer of Vitamin Water, sold that for millions and millions of dollars.
That's right. Yeah.
And he just, like, I'm not saying he's Illuminati or whatever these secret society are, but whatever that dude touches seems to turn to gold. And I ain't mad at him, dude. I'm just mad it ain't me, But very good character. It doesn't surprise me he's doing well at this, because everything he freaking does, man, is freaking money, man. He just comes up freaking spades every time, man. So I like the character. You know, he's the Doc Holliday, if you will, to the evil Wyatt Earp of Merriman and stuff. And another thing about the movie I really, really like is kind of how the good and bad is kind of between the good guys and the bad guys is kind of blurred a little bit, if you will, even though it's kind of Hollywoody, but where the bad guys are, you know, dangerous and they're evil, but the good guys are almost just as bad and dangerous, you know, and it kind of makes for this when you know that friction's going to happen, you know, you're going to have good Hollywood, good sparks, and probably violence if calmer heads don't prevail.
I think, so Butler's character, Nick there, I guess when they have Donnie there in the hotel room, he tells him, hey, we're the bad guys. Do you remember that scene? It just seemed like a lot of Heat had the same kind of thing, right? Where, you know, the Robert De Niro, you know, he's running his kind of crew his way, and then Al Pacino's running his team kind of in a similar way, and kind of paralleled each other. Any comments, Vic, on that?
Can I comment? Oh, go ahead, Vic.
Go ahead.
I was just going to comment on that dynamic as it related to where we were talking about good guy, bad guys, and how, you know, Donnie Wilson, the character, was kidnapped and choked out and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, just complete buffoonery. But I will say that, but a lot of the, how shall I say it, like street language and that kind of stuff would be used. You know, they're not going to be speaking in the good guys aren't going to be speaking in the old English, you know, proper everything. They're going to be talking crap to these dudes. They're going to look the part. They're going to look like dirt bags and everything else. And they might even use some of that kind of shockish language where we're like, hey, dude, look. But the fact that like dudes are getting just like snatched off the streets and taken to hotel rooms where the strippers, I guess, are still there, you know, and everything else. And the dude pees his pants and that's kind of buffoonery. But I will tell you, as it relates to the folks that I know on those teams, man, those dudes are the most honorable dudes, like in the name of, you know, truth, justice, and the American way, doing the Lord's work. And it's tough to do, man, you know, but ultimately when those cases are presented, and Vic with his background could probably speak more to this than mine, but when you have these life sentence, multi-million dollar type cases, like the burglary robbery task force was developed to handle and bring those people to court, that those cases have to be pure, man. Every part of it has to be good. You can't have like one loose cannon, you know, let's not let the kidnapping get in the way of a good case kind of thing, you know. We're like, yeah, this is happening, but that's just my 2 cents as it relates to some of that stuff. But otherwise, the language, talking crap, clowning the dude a little bit, the dress, all that, in my opinion, was very authentic. But,
it was.
You know, barring that kidnapping and driving the dude in the back seat through a major shootout and everything else, that kind of stuff. But some of the stuff was really good, I thought. And I'll let Vic talk. I apologize, Vic, for.
Oh no, that's good.
No, I just want to say the parallels is with Heat, where you had Pacino going to clubs in the middle of the night and pulling, what's that other rapper, Tone Luck, breaking his balls. It's the same thing. It was, you know, like in Heat, it was actually more believable as far as, and then they pulled Hank Azaria out of the hotel room when he was screwing around with Ashley Judd, just telling him, listen, you're going back to New Jersey to face a federal charge. This one was a little over the top with dealing with CIs.
Yeah.
Good.
That's
Gentlemen,
true.
it is time for our 1 minute break. So
okay, if you guys got to go pee or anything, all right,
I'm out.
Let's do it.
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all: movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis, official scoops from Geekosity magazine, reviews, and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield, where they're always talking nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
we're back.
We are back, everybody. Fantastic. Hey guys, I was going to bring up some trivia. I was looking over some trivia. I always like trivia about these movies, right? So Merriman, he makes a comment. Let's make sure we don't have any accidental discharges. And he looks at Bosco, who played Cheddar, Bob in 8 Mile. And so he shot himself by accident in the movie. I thought that was kind of crazy. What do you think about the storyline with the ex-wife and whatnot? I kind of heard and I kind of agree. You could have left that out of the movie. It really doesn't go into any depth as far as their relationships, but maybe just the lifestyle. What do you think?
I think
Ron?
they probably cut out more. I think
Yeah.
I think probably there was a lot more about him with the girlfriend or the wife or whatever it was, and it just got
That
left
makes
on
sense.
the cutting room floor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. They show that him at the schoolyard. It's obviously like maybe in Atlanta or back east. You know, it's definitely not a California schoolyard, and the way they're dressed. It just, yeah. I wish they would have filmed more on location in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I think they were trying to add a little bit of how shall I say, try to humanize the character a little bit. Where
Yeah.
I will be honest with you. I mean, I'll just make a general statement that in those types of teams, your family life suffers.
No, that's
missed
true. Yeah.
Tons of stuff. Alcohol is a big part of, I'll just say, that community, as well as we'll just say maybe not. It was never an issue for me, but like infidelity. You got dudes frequenting strip clubs. You got like all kinds
Yeah.
of this kind of thing. So now you get to see kind of how that negatively impacts old boy and Big Nick. Like when he comes in the house and his wife, he accidentally texts the wrong person, about
Yeah.
the thing, and the wife confronts him, and he's on a bender, right? He's been freaking,
Oh, yeah.
she's, he probably has body glitter and stinks of freaking, whatever else kind of, things that lady of the night smell of and everything. And he comes in and, you can see how, regardless of when you run that hard on the professional side of things, how it kind of bleeds over into our personal lives, and
That's true.
how
Yeah.
that kind of gets put on the back burner. And then you kind of see his struggle with, we'll just say, the collateral damage of his kids, and he's crying in his car. I got to be honest with you, even for like a movie where I guess if you want that kind of, ebb and flow of emotions, cool.
Yeah.
For me, I would say that's authentic. I can't tell you how many of my tight homeboys I've rolled out to, and
Yeah. Me
wouldn't
too.
say
Yeah.
necessarily talk them off a ledge, but because of decisions they made and or things that they should have done didn't work out right, and they're having a tough time with it. And it's usually relationship based, marriage based, even substance based. I have somebody that I tried to help out that was having an issue, and the second I referred them to somebody in particular, resource wise, I was outed as a rat. But ultimately, for the short time, he's since passed away, but ultimately for the short time, it probably saved that dude's life and everything else, and his job and everything else, as it related to we'll just say a drinking problem. How about that?
Yeah. And and I think what kind of feeds into that, and Vic, maybe you can give your perspective from NYPD. Some of these units, and maybe your unit too. I mean, they're like off the grid, right? They're not working out of a station. Maybe they have they're out of a headquarters bureau, right? But they check in once a week, or they meet somewhere, and how the case is going. Or Vic, how did you guys operate?
No, we didn't have that much freedom. So, like, for argument's sake, I worked out of the Bronx office, a satellite office. Our main office was in Queens that had 100 detectives, and there were 20 detectives from my unit in the Bronx office. But there was a lieutenant that ran that office and several sergeants, and you couldn't just come and go as you please. You could sign on out in the field, but it wasn't like, you could go wherever you wanted. I mean, there was definitely accountability, and your boss would check in on you sometimes. Depends on the boss too. If the boss didn't trust you, he'd be up your ass. If it was a guy that knew you were doing what you were supposed to be doing, he'd leave you alone. And to speak with what Ron was talking about, we had guys like that were up all hours of the night doing things they shouldn't have. But those guys, and those guys tend to be on patrol. the NYPD does a pretty good job as far as filtering out people that are handling sensitive information or having a lot of freedom. So they don't want guys like that are doing things like that. So it'll show up in your evaluations and then the interview process. Do they get through? Yeah, absolutely. But it's the exception of the rule. You see more guys like, what's his character? Big Nick on
Big Nick.
patrol as opposed to working in a sensitive unit.
Oh, gotcha. How about Ron? Any input on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Vic speaks to NYPD. I would say that Big Nick's character is probably consistent with like a majors type guy, and they do have a lot of autonomy. So, having been a lieutenant and a sergeant in that chain of command that deals with folks that are out running operations, need me to review and approve search operations and things like that, risk management wise. Um, I will tell you, for me, uh, the most important part of whether that team was able to do a lot of really good work would be if I trusted in the decision making and experience and expertise of the team sergeant.
Right.
So
Yeah.
for me, the team sergeant makes it go. So like I knew the teams that I oversaw, where the sergeant would come in and he was what we call a deputy 5. So he just thought and ran his team like he was one of the deputies. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I would have to adjust my approach, even though I would still allow them to do really good things. It would be different than if I knew one guy would be willing to have those really tough conversations and rein his guys in. So it would really depend, in the spirit of what Vic was talking about. That team sergeant is going to dictate not only capability wise, but decision making wise and everything else. And Big Nick's character here, just getting in a full on, fully automatic freaking machine gun style deal, and the best thing he can do is wander up on cars and tell people to get down. That's probably going to cause me to like want to scrutinize his his planning and everything a little bit more and whatnot. But for me, the main driving factor would be the team sergeant and his ability to coordinate and command and control his folks. And then that dude, if the dude could do that, or even the chick could do that, for me, just give me on paper what makes sense and what seems reasonable, and I'll bless it with the powers that I have. And then obviously I'm still ultimately responsible for whatever the heck happens. But let's make no mistake, is the overall person above it that's signing on the latest line of whatever that search package or operations plan is, you're not in control, but you're definitely responsible for whatever the hell happens. So this last shooting scene where I'm watching it run in the background, I would not want to be that freaking team lieutenant.
Yeah. I think we had units that ran with autonomy, like you said, Ron. I when I was working Linwood in South Central LA, so a group of us were going to be we discovered that we were going to be transferred out of the station to bring new blood in, or whatever the reason was. We were kind of cast as leading newly assigned people astray, but we found a list, of everybody that was going to be transferred under we found it under the watch commander's desk bladder. And so there was a list of like 15 deputies, 2 sergeants and a lieutenant. So I remember approaching the lieutenant who was on the list, and he used to work for, maybe it was a finger of, I'll have you speak to it, Ron, of major crimes, or maybe it was just by itself. They were called spies, special investigations, and they had a lot on everybody, I think, of information they gathered through various means. But anyways, when I told him, hey, look, you're on the list to be transferred out of here. And he laughed at me. He says, I'm not going anywhere. He says, I got the files. When I was in spy, I had 2 files, one at work and one in my garage. I know too much. And you know what? He didn't go anywhere. Everybody else got transferred, but he didn't. Do you remember Spy, Ron? Yeah.
Well, so make no mistake about it. Big Brother's real. And I'd hate to say it, man, whether it's through infidelity or anything like that, if you get dirt on somebody, they're relatively controllable, if you kind of want to go down that rabbit hole. But
Yeah, I just was
Yeah,
kind
make
of,
no
it just
mistake,
reminded me that these units kind of operated as opposed to what Vic was saying. These guys were like, they were off the grid. I think a lot of especially these narcotic units. Yeah.
Well, you remember Arco Narco, which
Yeah.
we had. I mean, and that's very well documented. And actually, I don't know if you want to dive down this, but we had a team sergeant at one of the major narcos crew named, and I'll mention his name just for accuracy, named Bonnie
Yeah.
Bryant. And he used to come in as a narco detective and work overtime in the jails when I worked the inmate reception center, and we would take really good care of the patrol folks. And I believe he was an East LA deputy. Not, if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah.
But when I was commenting on us trying to dig up work, okay, like before the AB 109 population came out, we were like idle hands, and I had a bunch of greener folks, and so I would make whoever the team leader was, we'd rotate. I'd make them write a warrant. I'd have them do this, I'd have them do that, and then we'd rotate everybody. Well, I'm calling everybody that I know and everything else. Word gets back to Sergeant Bryant that Ron Daly has a team that's looking for work. And we've
Right.
done
Yeah.
good work with the other majors because prison gangs and some of the other folks were saying, dude, we had a guy in a house. They showed up, tactically handled it freaking perfect, pulled old boy out. We didn't have to do anything. All we did was call him up. And as long as they have a good lieutenant, if we're out of county or something, I'm all good with it. Just have a lieutenant so that when I was a sergeant, I could go. Well, Reader's Digest version is, and I'll just cut to the chase, is Bonnie Bryant contacts me and says he wants us to do some work. I'm like, okay, cool. So he says he has a lieutenant, the whole 9 yards. I'm like, okay, cool. And we were going to do a rip on a car that was supposedly rolling with a bunch of cash. So now we're in downtown LA, and I have on my team, I want to say I had 8 or 9 dedicated deputies. Everybody had their own patrol car. We had UC capabilities as well, but they wanted us to do the takedown.
Right.
Okay, so we were just going to be uniform dudes. So I have a handful of folks that were not kind of dressed up in our tactical gear, that are actually just wearing like Class A uniforms, uniform badge, etc., that are going to do this rip in downtown LA. And we're just kind of an amoeba, keeping kind of a amoeba thing around where the eye or the main surveillance unit is calling out their stuff. Well, Reader's Digest version is during that whole operation, when we go to do the rip, the eye loses the car.
And
And
the eye is the first one
is the first
surveilling?
guy, the guy that has obs or observations on the bad guy, and it's a moving operation because the dude's in a vehicle. Okay, so it was going to be a drug buy where there was a significant amount of they call them Mexican kilos, but they were basically like Tupperware deals of methamphetamine. Okay, but they called them Mexican kilos because I guess of the shape or whatever it was. I don't know how they come up with these names, but so they lose the car that was going to be a couple $100,000. Wow. So the car goes into a parking structure downtown LA. They lose the car. Well, later on, UC, being the major crimes unit, is how the story goes, does a stop in their plain clothes on some Mexican national drug runners that they know have money. No ops plan, no nothing. So like you said, this is very autonomous, and the team sergeant is involved. Okay, so he's obviously not doing his job on a variety of levels administratively. Well, CHP sees it and rolls up on it to like kind of back them up. They see these dudes are all playing clothes. They start talking. Well, these guys ask CHP, hey, as a uniformed presence, can you stick around? Okay.
Yeah.
Now CHP sticks around. I won't get into all the techniques and tactics and everything because I don't want to burn anything. They asked CHP to sink one of the bad guys in their car while they allow these other 2 people to be in the sheriff's car, because a lot of these guys are rolling UC. So there's no marked sheriff's unit there with a secure back seat. So they start separating parties and doing their kind of little field investigation. Well, the story goes is that when CHP is detaining this dude and distracting him in the backseat of their car, he lets them know that these guys, they're cops, but these guys have ripped us off a variety of times and they're stealing all our money that's in the car. Well,
I don't. Go ahead.
So fast forward, we know nothing of this as a team. This gets shot up to the highest levels. we end up doing a couple more hits for them that comes up with a lot of drugs and a lot of cash. And all we did was clear the location. As the tactical entry team, we would go in, clear the location, make sure everything's good. Investigators would go in order to maintain integrity. 2 people would be in a room and search the room in tandem, would recover whatever evidence it was. Well, Reader's Digest versions, it started to get so bad that they wired our secret squirrel squadron, wired up a whole room, okay, a whole house in one of the cities, and made sure word got back to this crew that it was available, for lack of a better word. So they have this all wired up for sound and sight, and they get Sergeant Bonnie Bryant going in, hitting the pad, okay, because his team had word that this was a good pad, and it shows him putting several $100,000 in his flak vest, going out to his car, driving to his other car where his POV or his personal vehicle, and doing that. So, and saying that with all that autonomy and that sergeant, when this whole thing breaks, guess who's pulled front and center by the man? Because at that time, the undersheriff was running and monitoring all the PCT teams or parole compliance teams, of which I was the sergeant that did probably a half a dozen of his hits for him.
Yeah.
And now, dude, we're looked at as, hey, bro, where did all this money go? And I'm like, and we lost a car with $200,000 in it in a parking garage in downtown LA. So luckily we were all clean on that, but that was part of that as it relates to when you give a lot of autonomy, especially where the team sergeant freaking sucks or didn't do his job, what kind of things can happen. I bet you Vic has some supposed stories that probably pattern that as well. But that's why I say that sergeant spot is the most important, where you can do the unpopular things and rein people back, but also still kind of, let's just say within the confines of the rules, take calculated risk.
To catch Vic up on, let's get his take on this. But we had the Arco Narco. We had a narcotics unit that was, they were through asset forfeiture and everything. They were just bringing in probably millions of dollars, and I think they started supposedly when you would have these ethics trainings afterwards. Supposedly they started, well, we'll be reimbursed for our pizza. Eventually, these guys were buying like condos for $100,000 cash, and they got caught up. And after that, there was all these procedures as far as taking money in. But did you have any?
That's happened with us a couple of times. Probably about 20 years ago, we had a team called El Dorado, and that was the money laundering team.
El Dorado, I like it.
That's what they were called, and they would follow the money launderers, and they used to call them Smurfs. And what they would do is they would run around with cash, and then go to different check cashing places and get money orders. So you'd have a guy with $300,000 buying $3,000 money orders, and they would take these stacks and then send them back to Colombia, Mexico. And anyway, they were following some guy that they knew was going to have a lot of cash. And the next thing you know, 2 guys jump out of a car with NYPD raid jackets, and they grab this guy. Like they're surveilling this money launderer, and they're like, wait a minute, that's so-and-so. Didn't he retire like 6 months ago from Major Case Narcotics? And isn't that so-and-so? Doesn't he work in another unit? So basically what they stumbled upon was a couple of retired guys and a guy that was still active. And they would go out with raid jackets. They had their own CI that was giving up guys that were moving money for a cut. And then they were ripping them off. And it was a big scandal. And, like you said, it's autonomy. It's the NYPD doesn't trust anyone. Like you guys seem to have a lot more freedom than we ever had. Yeah. But guys still went off the reservation every now and then. And, it's sad when you hear about something like that.
Did they ever do a movie on that, Caper? That sounds like a great scenario to put on film.
I don't think so, but there's more. I mean, there's just it's happened a lot of times with different guys. There was another case where you had this detective. He's since died, but he's at a homicide scene. 2 guys get killed in a car, and crime scene and everything. And a day or 2 later, one of the victims' family comes into the precinct and says there was $300,000 in the trunk of that car, and they're adamant about it.
Oh man!
And this detective a couple of days later comes forward with $100,000 And
What?
he says his father was a career IEB guy. I think his father was still active at the time or had just retired. His father was like an inspector. And the guy comes forward and he says, listen, I got pressured into this. It was the patrol sergeant from the precinct, myself, and a guy from crime scene, which didn't make any sense because you got 3 guys from 3 different units that don't really know each other, right? It's not like 3 tight guys that are going to rip somebody off. And he says, we found the money and we split it 3 ways. So IEB goes and gets a search warrant for both the other 2 guys' houses. Don't find a penny. And, you know, the theory was he stole the money and then he panicked when he heard someone was asking for it, went to his father for advice. And his father basically told him, all right, this is what you're going to do. Come forward with the money, hoping to save your job and give up these other 2 guys and it'll create a smoke screen. And it was one of the rare times that someone kept his job over something like that.
You're kidding me. He kept his job?
Yeah. He worked in a Harlem precinct and they transferred him to the Bronx to my precinct. And like, it was one of those things, like no one talked to him for the rest of his career. It was
just a minor mistake.
Yeah.
It was just a minor mistake, Cliff. He should be able to keep his job.
He should be able to keep his job.
You know what was funny about that, and it jarred my memory when Vic was talking, is what's crazy about the Arco Narco thing when you guys were having that dialogue is that the supposed orchestrator of that whole deal was a sergeant. I believe his last name was Sobel.
That's right. That's his name. Yeah. I didn't know the details.
He orchestrated the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then he's the dude that flipped on everybody and got the least amount of sentence, man.
Yeah.
And I know dudes on my department have done days off for using the term rat, but he rats everybody out, yet he's the one that does it. And it rings true to what Vic's talking about, this smoke screen and everything, where you just, you know, instead of, I mean, taking money's wrong. Instead of just owning that and being like, that's not something where you could go, oh yeah, you know, I shot this guy 1 too many times, or I punched this guy 1 too many times, or instead of like putting him in the car nice and gentle, I was in a rush and his head actually accidentally bounced off the freaking A-frame of the car or whatever, and busted his melon open. You can't try to massage that into, it was part of my regular duties. And then instead of just owning your horrible, illegal, unethical behavior that puts everybody in a bad light, you decide to just sprinkle that freaking, unicorn dust all over the place and implicate a bunch of other dudes. And it sounds like what Vic's saying is that these other dudes, not that we're angels or anything, but we're innocent dudes that were just out doing their job. And this dude just tried to save his butt.
It was, they didn't know each other. It was like you had the desk officer of the precinct, the detective from upstairs. They really didn't know each other. You had a guy from crime scene, which was even more bizarre. He didn't know either one of them. So it seems like the first guy, like you were talking about, that sergeant was the first one of the dance to cut himself a deal.
And he wasn't even the dude that got pinched first. It was one of the detectives who was putting his wife in on the game, and money was coming in, and then he obviously his penis slip and fell in some other girl, and she found out about it, so she runs and rats everything out, and that's kind of the story of how that comes. And then later on, once everybody is omerta, freaking dude, we ain't saying nothing, dude, and they plead the fifth on everything. Sobel behind the scene comes in and says, "Bro, I'll tell you everything, man," and cuts a deal.
Man.
And that could be inaccurate, but that's my recollection of reading and watching all the video and everything else, because they have those dudes even back in the 80s on video, wired in hotel rooms and everything else, divvying stuff up. So they were bought and paid for. There was no, it's all good, it's a misunderstanding. It was very abundantly clear what they were doing and how they were doing it.
Yeah, so it's amazing that NYPD had all these things happen after Serpico and the NAP commission and everything. But still, people went wayward, man. It's weird.
Oh, I worked with a guy. With a guy in field training that went bad. And nobody knew in his spare time. He had a cousin that was a drug dealer. He got grabbed by the DEA for moving weight. And he said, well, hold on. You got me. They caught him over the weekend moving a kilo or something. And he says, all right, you got me, but I can give you corruption in my precinct. So what they did was they did a cover story. He went into work with a cast on Monday, came up with this story that he had broken his arm. So they put him on desk duty with a cast. And they put a wire or a Kel inside the cast. And basically, for 6 months or whatever, he was baiting guys into conversations, but there was no corruption. It was him. They got a bunch of guys on PICU and shit. Nobody went to jail over, the conversations, but it was him, and he tried to cut a deal.
Wow. And on the movie scene, so on the Federal Reserve Bank, there's no way they would ever allow a delivery guy to have access or go up and deliver to these folks. That was off.
He's not picking up from 7-Eleven. If there was a change in protocol, the company would call and say these two drivers. It's not just the whole thing didn't make sense to me.
No. Ron, did you know? So on the we had on a previous podcast, we were researching those North Hollywood, the bank shooting. But those two guys, they had done a lot of, or they had done a few successful armored car robberies before the B of A bank, which allowed them to buy all this great equipment. Did you know anything about those capers? Or?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and I just have like all this useless knowledge that's bouncing around in my head that you pull out, because this isn't even scripted. But Mata Serenu and Phillips,
that's right, those
the
two guys,
shooters. Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. So when that all went down, me and we were brand new jail deputies. Were drinking at a watering hole at a steakhouse, watching it at the bar up on the TV, like up on the TV that's like up on the wall. And it got to the point where we knew that we weren't we didn't have the training. We were just jail deputies, man. We had done the basic post academy and everything else, never even been on a ride along at patrol as a uniformed deputy. And it got to the point where we started discussing, hey, dude, are we rolling?
Are we rolling to this?
Are we rolling, bro? They need us.
Guns. Yeah.
They need the dream team, bro. Yeah. I got 16 rounds in my Beretta 92 FS, and I'm ready to rock and roll. And we started talking about it, and we were, let's just say we would have made arrangements for a designated driver, but we were probably 3 or 4 beers deep. And it was like, this sounds like a good idea, bro. We could be the guys, But so with that being said, to back up, during my time, and you had been at TSB, we had a contact in the training and scheduling office as deputies, where we would, on some of our RDOs or regular days off, we would work 18 hours of overtime. So we would go from like the red line to the orange line, which are the buses. Yeah. We'd write like a half a dozen tickets, which put us for the whole bureau in the middle third. Okay. And we worked like, overtime there. And so some of the sergeants during briefing would call dudes out, and they'd be like, hey, well, at least we know Daly and this dude and this dude and this dude are here. And at least we know some people will get citations. And I wasn't a big ticket writer, but I wanted them to know if they hired me, I'd give them a little bit of work. Right. So we would Jesse James just get on, hold the bus up, walk on, show me your tickets. If you're not, hey, you 4 get out here, sit on the curb. We wouldn't search them or anything, and just start cutting ducats. Hey, man, have a good day. You can use this yellow one to ride the bus for the rest of the day, kind of thing, and everything else. So we would do lots of overtime stuff as it relates to that. So I got a little bit off a tangent on that, but I had
those
a lot
guys.
Of experience.
Because LA was really. I think I read somewhere that it was really from the 60s when they were the bank robbery capital. But New York City seemed like they would be also prime pickings for bank robberies because of the congestion and whatnot too. Did that happen a lot? In New
but
York?
not like you guys, and you didn't have the car chases because a lot of those bank robberies were in Manhattan.
Yeah,
you're not going to try to take off in a car in Manhattan.
You couldn't. You get caught up.
Caught in 5 seconds. Different boroughs. I worked in the Bronx and Harlem quite a bit. There weren't a lot of bank robberies. There were more in downtown Manhattan, and the perp would flee on foot. It wasn't like you guys where, you're watching Fox News and you're watching a car chase that goes on forever. We didn't have that.
That's fun stuff, though.
Hey, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, Cliff, but I regained my train of thought.
Yeah.
As it relates to work and all that overtime at TSB.
Yeah.
I forget what division it is, but it was the first patrol station or station 1 for LAPD. And how I found this place was I was working overtime in the Valley at TSB. And we would just kind of drive around. There really wasn't nothing to do. If you got a call, you got a call. But otherwise, if you were the Atom unit, you were the car, and then you would have foot beats on the train. And, we would just kind of rotate around. Well, when we were out there working, that first station, which I think is station 1, I don't know how LAPD refers to it, they converted into a museum.
Well, I
and
didn't
it
know that.
has
Wow.
all of the gear and guns and everything that these dirtbags on the North Hollywood shooting, Phillips and Mataserenu, used in
Oh,
this museum.
Cool.
And it's
that's
very
cool.
well done. And so I apologize about having the shiny balloon moment, but
No,
we would just
yeah. I didn't
we
even
would
know
just
that.
go around and jack the trains and jack the buses, write a
Yeah.
handful of tickets each, and then we would just kind of go eat, explore, just make sure we were visible. And we happened upon that museum that literally has the body armor on a mannequin, has the AK-47s, has like show casings, all kinds of nonsense like that. And so if you're out in the LA area and you want to visit that, I would highly recommend it. I think it might be open to
Yeah.
the public, but we just kind of badged our way in, and
Did
we were all in
they ever
uniform.
find their money? Because there was a story I read that like afterward, like I know one of the families was suing the LA police, which I thought was ridiculous. But an attorney's going to file a lawsuit. But weren't they trying to figure out like from the prior bank robberies? Because it was a lot of money that these guys had stolen. There was no way they could have spent it. And I know one of them had invested in a couple of businesses. Were they ever able to recover any of that money that those guys had socked away prior to the last robbery?
To specifically and directly answer your question, no, but I want to say my recollection, because I followed it, because like I said, I was a brand new deputy, and when you're new, these kind of things just kind of
Oh
leave an
yeah.
impression on you. Is Mataserenu's mom was the one that filed the lawsuit because she said they let the cops bleed out, and
Oh, yeah.
the stuff going on was that, if you remember, like LAPD had that battering ram and they were just smashing everything after both Phillips and Mataserenu were obviously dead based off the footage, but they had information that there was more, and kind of the friction of the whole situation, that there was more than one suspect out there, and they were
Right.
mashing and doing everything. But the last I heard, and again, I have no inside information on this at all, is that the mom was somehow involved in that money circle somehow, and that they were looking at her, and obviously she's the one that filed the lawsuit and was all upset. But to answer your question directly, Vic, I can't even speak to it.
I bet them. Yeah, I bet they got that money. I know they had a lot. They when I was researching, they had hit quite a few armored cars like in the valley, and that's why they were able to buy all these crazy vests and these weapons, and they were reinvesting in their business, which I have to applaud
Didn't they
them
get
for.
stopped like they got stopped with a shitload of guns and they vouched everything on them, and it really didn't set up any red flags. I know prior to that they got arrested or stopped with a shitload of guns, and I know the cops took it from them and vouched it for investigation, and then I don't know what happened with it.
Yeah, that vaguely jars my memory as well, Vic. One thing I will say, just because I'm a big patrol guy and I think that's where everything begins and ends, I don't think, the guys in their tactical green pajamas don't show up and surround houses and do what they do. Child abuse detectives don't show up. Narcotics detectives, for the most part, at the station level, don't do anything until a regular uniformed officer or deputy goes out and handles a call for service or does some observation work, generates a report, and then they follow up on it. And back to the North Hollywood Bank, off of Kittredge was the name of the street, because I would drive it all the time working overtime, was two uniformed dudes driving down the street and saw a paramilitary suited up dude yanking a girl back into the bank at the front doors. And that's what
Yeah,
kicked the whole thing off,
that's,
man.
otherwise they would
So
have got away with that. Yeah, for
well,
sure.
they would have, and the next thing you know, and I mean, thankfully, other than the bad guys, nobody died. And there's some really good documentaries on it,
Pretty
as it
amazing.
relates
Yeah,
to, like, some of the people became like pastors of churches and ordained ministers, and all kinds of other stuff, talking about the wounded officers, that, and very compelling radio transmissions were saying, "I'm bleeding out, tell my family I
yeah,
love them, I'm dying," because they were stuck on positions for hours
yeah.
and nobody could get to them, because they were like, "Hey, we have, again, even though it was inaccurate, you have the perception that you got a variety of dudes running around with fully automatic freaking AKs." And the regular patrol deputy at that time, we didn't deploy ARs. we
Right.
didn't even
Yeah,
deploy we didn't even deploy 1 ounce rifled slugs for our shotguns. So
yeah,
so at that point, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go out and bat against Nolan Ryan when all I've done is play t-ball. So they were
yeah.
holding people back in a very big containment, and weren't going in to do these rescues. And then obviously our active shooter training with the advent of contact teams and rescue teams kind of changed that. and Columbine as well. But that was a lot was gleaned from the North Hollywood thing that I think parallels the movie.
Well, didn't the
Yeah.
guys go to a gun store? Like the gun store guy was just
Yeah.
handing out to you guys rifles.
There's a gun store right like a couple of blocks from there. Yeah.
They did that during the '92 riots as well.
Yeah.
And there was even dudes bringing stuff from home, like deer rifle scopes and 30 caliber carbines and everything, because they were just so outgunned. But yeah, the Koreans on the roof of the the '92 riots, those dudes that had gun stores, and the vast majority of them were Asian folks, because I'm kind of known as a gun guy. Whenever you went into any of those stores out there, it was a Korean, like a Korean dude or an Asian guy,
Yeah.
and they love the police, man. And they were just handing stuff out. And
Yeah,
I will just say, in the fog of war, those firearms, I heard, never made it back and were never accounted for after the fact.
Yeah,
Because
it's just
who they handed them to and when, everybody was like, dude,
God, this
I
just
don't know what
reminds
you're
me of
talking
all
about.
this.
So you had thousands of rounds flying around there that were never counted for or reported. Maybe.
Yeah. It's just, and then, God, it enrages me now that I think about the recent, people just coming out against the, we got to get rid of this militarization of police departments. And, what are they doing with all these weapons? And it's just, and it's only going to, I can't imagine what kind of weaponry that's coming across the border. Can you speak, Vic? Because, and I was kind of amazed coming from upstate New York. I get out to LA and I'm in South Central and all these gang, we got our Model 15 38s and all these gang members had AK-47s up the yin yang. I mean, they would leave them lying in the street. And prior to us going to our Berettas, what kind of weapons did you come up with in your career on the streets there in NYPD?
38 Smith & Wesson 6-shot. And my class was one of the first ones where they actually gave us the speed loaders, the little six, because the old timers used to either have
the loop loaders. I had loop loaders. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're in the belt.
The dump pouches.
The dump pouches. Oh, yeah. The dump pouches. Yeah.
And yeah, probably because I came on in 87 and then probably about 94, 95 is when they started changing over to the 9mm.
Yeah, I want to, Ron, because I think it took us 4 or 5 years, but I remember getting our Berettas like 91. I think I got mine 90, but people didn't get it for a couple more years after that. But do you remember when you got it?
Yeah, we've converted a few times. From the we'll just call it the wheel gun to the Beretta 92 FS to the M&P 2.0, the Smith & Wesson, and now because hopefully people are seeing the light that we've offered through our training bureau, which I worked right hand with the other lieutenant on it that kind of did this pilot project and everything, where they allowed deputies to go in and on duty, off duty, shoot a variety of handguns in kind of a combat-esque situation and and grade it accordingly. And now you can carry everything from like a staccato with a red dot optic, everything, if you pay your own money, which that's give or take is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about $2,000 to $2,500 gun. And I will tell you, when I was on the department, anybody carrying a staccato with a red dot and any DIS or deputy involved shooting or 998 for radio code was 100% hit carrying that weapon with that sighting system. And so yeah, there was a variety of things that you could carry. And just a funny story as it relates to you guys talking about wheel guns. My dad, before he passed away, he did about 49 and a half years in law enforcement, and he started and did like a 30-year plus career with the CHP. And when I was a kid, my dad would talk to me about that Newhall shooting where the guys had trained to carry the dump pouches and or put the ammo in their pockets to reload, and that during their cleanup, when they were on the range training, they didn't want to leave the brass out on the deal. So you would pick up the brass between reloads.
Yeah.
And when those guys got killed, the reports of the eyewitness accounts and everything, and even the bad guys, was that during training, because it's a training scar, these dudes between reloads were bending down and policing their brass.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and so as it relates to that, that was one of the stories that always stuck in my head as it related to proper training and how you can hardwire, I guess, for lack of a better word, some very bad habits in situations that, even though a minute's a minute, we'll just call it a very time compressed situation. Seconds matter, man. And if you're bending over to pick up shell casings, because when the medical examiner did autopsies, and I kind of dove into this a little bit more just based off my training and like debriefing background, some of those guys that were killed had empty shell casings in their pockets.
That's right. I still
Cops.
remember seeing their bodies in the morgue, the pictures of it, those
Yep.
CHP uniforms. Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then from that point on, when we did our training, Vic, I don't know if you guys did this. So we were like, as soon as when you were shooting, you didn't pick up anything.
No,
everybody
no.
left their rounds.
And they taught us to look up.
Oh, really?
Like
Good.
Always, like if they would have us behind something and you'd pick your head up and look up, and there was a guy. The reason they went to the speed loaders was there was a cop out in Queens. I think his name was Scott Goodell. He got into a running gun battle with this Jamaican guy, and he ran out of bullets, and he went behind a car and he was trying to manually load, the 38 caliber rounds into the wheel gun, and the guy figured it out and came around the car and killed him. So that's in the NYPD. Unfortunately, it's usually a tragedy when they decide to make a decision to give us equipment or change procedure.
Yeah. Oh man, that is crazy. We have like some crazy. That reminds me of a shooting. This guy, you probably know the story, Ron. I was working. There was a place in South El Monte, which was out of the Temple Station area. And so I always parked next to this one restaurant. I can't remember what it was, and another deputy, he would park there too. But behind there was a strip mall, and there was a little bar in there. So this deputy, he got out of the car to go take a leak. And so while he's around the building, he watches a guy come around and sneak up on his radio car, and who was going to execute him in the car. And then he ended up getting in a gun battle over the car, the roof of the car, and they ended up in a shootout. Do you remember that, Ron?
I don't, but I'll just say God has a sick sense of humor, man. I mean, that's, the things movies are made of,
Oh man, that was crazy, because the car, the roof had like gun, the rounds were bouncing off the roof of the car underneath the light bar, and he ended up surviving that. And I don't know, I think the suspect was killed, I'm pretty sure, but thank God, but I was thinking, man, there was always a couple of times when I think, man, that could have been me, because that's where I always parked there too. That happened to me too many times, but for the grace of God, go I, for sure. But let's see what else. We're going to go to about 10 more minutes, guys, and we're going to get Vic out on time today. Any more about the storyline you guys want to say about the? And I always love these things where you guys mentioned Dobson, but I love when the director, I guess it's kind of the directors always try to put themselves in a scene in the movie, and so I was surprised to see that the technical advisor you mentioned was in a couple scenes.
Yeah, if I can comment on some of my
Please.
favorite scenes that had me like giggling like a little schoolgirl, like I actually even rewind it when I was reviewing it. So like I love the Benihana restaurant scene where Big Nick rolls up on Donnie Wilson and is like, Donnie, man, you were spotting me at the gym, and the tension and how he's talking crap and everything. He's like, yeah, number 55 from Long Beach Poly, and he's like, and he's not letting it go. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, the bad guy's got the best of the good guy, and he goes to walk away, and then in order for Gerard Butler to be true to his character, he turns around, he's like, no, I got it, blah, blah, blah. And he like turns around, and his homeboy has to come in and kind of like mediate or de-escalate. I will tell you that I thought that was a fun scene, and I'd probably say it was more accurate. Not only have I had partners have to come in and intercede on my behalf, I've had to do it as well to kind of be like, whether it's a use of force situation or something that's getting a little verbal. And then the other scene that I really, really liked as well, storyline wise, was after the big shooting, and Big Nick's at the back of his car, and they've discovered that, and it makes for a good sequel, which I hear is coming out sometime soon.
I heard that too. Yeah.
It's just the shredded money. And he's sitting there having a cigarette, and soy boy FBI guy comes up and he offers him a stick of gum, and he's like, hey, it's organic. He's like, you really need to quit smoking. Yeah. He's like, hey, it's organic. For whatever reason, that made me laugh, because then you could kind of see that those dudes are kind of understanding or having a moment.
Yeah.
And with how woke society is, I hope they don't explore that moment a little bit too deeply in the sequel, if you know what I'm saying. But otherwise, I thought that was a really cool part where I just started laughing out loud, and I rewound it because the guy's all about his health and everything, and he's like, I'm not vegan, I'm vegetarian or whatever, and they got in that little beef, and it looks like there's a little bit of a professional courtesy and or a little mending of the fence, if you will. So those are kind of two amongst others. And I'll let, if Vic wants to kind of dive in on his favorite scenes or storyline stuff. Those were some things that popped out in my mind that seemed kind of authentic and funny and gave a little levity to the situation.
The last scene, which was like a takeoff on The Usual Suspects, when
Love that movie.
Big Nick goes into the bar and he asked about the guy and he knows he's not going to be working there anymore, obviously. And then he just starts looking around and he sees the photo of them playing soccer and the whole thing comes. It's the same scene in The Usual Suspects when Kevin Spacey leaves the detective office and Chaz Palminteri's looking around the office and he realizes that the guy has used his stories from everything inside that office. And it dawns on him, it was him the whole time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, because it works. I don't know whether to take that as a slight creatively that they cut corners or because scenes like that work so good that it's worth repeating, but I love that part of the movie as well, Vic, because that's very Kyler Sose-ish, where they let the main guy go, because now as fast forward where he's in London at the bar with his British accent serving drinks and then finds out that one of the characters works at the Diamond Exchange across the way. And one thing also, just because I'm a practitioner and fan, is the number of MMA guys, UFC guys, all the way from, like, if you remember, like when they were doing the trash trucks, the dude that very looks Russian is a dude named Oleg Taktarov, who fought for the UFC title a number of times and was actually in some of the first few UFCs. And then the Hawaiian dude that looks Hispanic, the skinny dude that was also driving when he jumps out of the trash truck when Bosco comes up and holds it at gunpoint and tells him, "Hey, dude, get out of the car." That's actually Max Holloway, who is still a UFC fighter, was a multi-time champion.
Wow.
And then Michael Bisping, who now does a lot of commentary for the UFC, who was also a world champion in the UFC, who's a British dude, is the guy that is acting that is from the Diamond Exchange across the street and the last bar scene. So there's a lot of these cameos, I guess they call them in the business, that I thought was kind of interesting too, because I was like, dude, that's that guy. And when you were talking about the pictures on the wall and him looking at the soccer team, it's got all those dudes in it.
Yeah, so I was looking at earlier because I didn't recognize any of those guys like you did, but so it said there was 4 UFC fighters: John Lewis, Max Holloway.
Oh yeah, John
Lewis
Lewis was another guy behind the scenes that was in the first UFCs. He was the Federal Reserve officer that went through when they browned out, when they lost power, when they were using the EMP device. He was the dude that went shirt and made everything was clear. And the guy that went downstairs and was scolding looked like he was maybe like a Somali national when he was down in the cafeteria because they pulled everybody out of the counting rooms. And he was like, "Hey, you keep stepping on your mic and everything else." That was John Lewis.
Oh,
yeah, and he's not well known if you're not running in circles. In those types of circles. But I immediately recognized him as well.
Wow. And shoot, I was going to it said in the closing credits because I was wondering about that $100 bill they showed, but they said the serial number is DOT, standing for Den of Thieves, and then it had 000 2018 for the release date of the movie. I love all those little things.
Yeah,
those are talk about. Let's see. We got a few more minutes, like 3 more minutes. Closing thoughts, Ron Daly, on the movie.
I don't know what you give it. I mean, I will say the critics and the experts that review these things kind of beat it up a little bit. A little long for my liking. Enough action-packed, stuff where it definitely kept me interested and made me laugh. I would recommend it and see it again because, like, for somebody like me, I'm not a big TV watcher. I read a lot. I'm not a big movie watcher. But to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, and just kind of mindlessly go numb and be entertained and eat some buttered popcorn, I thought it was worth its price of admission. I don't even know what it costs to get in movies anymore because I don't go, but I'd pay to go see a movie like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. How about you, Vic? Closing
it was okay. It's a guy film.
Yeah, guy film. Yeah,
but I kind of think they ripped off Heat. and The
I
Usual
think they did.
Suspects.
Yeah.
And I think both those movies were a lot better done.
Yeah, definitely.
Like Ron said, it's something, if it's on, I'd watch it again. It's mindless,
Yeah.
and you know what it is? We look at things differently because we were in that world. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We worked in law enforcement. We know how cops act. We know how bad guys act. So for me, a lot of times, I always take these movies with a grain of salt. But I'm more rougher on them. I guess maybe Heat was, in my opinion, Heat was really well done.
He was awesome, and to me, I mean, of course, between Al Pacino, and I love Al Pacino, but that's just me. But I thought it was much better done too. But it's funny. I've seen people review this movie, and they've watched it 4, 5, 6 times, which I don't think I could do. But
No.
yeah. So, man, great job, guys. And Ron, I appreciate a fellow LA sheriff member like myself. And you brought a lot to this movie. You worked and you worked at the Academy, right, Ron? Also, besides being a lieutenant at stations.
Yeah, so I worked under training bureau under more than one rank, but I did work what was known as the recruit training unit as a drill instructor for a couple years at the rank of deputy, and then ultimately went back as a lieutenant and primarily reviewed use of force cases as it relates to like risk management and whether the folks that were engaged in that incident, their performance was consistent with what we train and or the law, etc. So I had a different role, but it obviously gave me a different lens and allowed me to kind of underwrite a lot of the very tough police work our folks do in the name of, instead of suspending and putting people on the bricks, giving them training to do it. Some stuff we couldn't just because it was just that bad.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I really enjoyed that spot because it gave me a very influential voice in the room, and I could help those folks be prepared so that we could do it better the next time. To answer your question, yes, I did it at a variety of ranks and had a variety of roles, and that was probably one of the coolest opportunities I had on the department.
Well, thank you for because you brought a lot of insight to the movie. We're going to end, Vic, with you. Just final thoughts before we say goodbye. And I want to thank you guys again. It was a great episode. It was a great movie, and you guys are awesome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Nice meeting you, Ron. Cliff, thank you for having me on my show. And listeners, go to Amazon, type in my name, Vic Ferrari, like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free.
Thanks both of you guys. And we're going to end the episode for Morning Coffee with the Chief. I'll turn it back over to the producers.